In this video, I want to talk about the mistakes you're making when you're drawing your portraits, or at least your black and white portraits, and getting better at your values. I want to show you a very old portrait. It's one of my first portraits that I ever did, and I did it for a friend and her mom. She sent me this picture not too long ago, and I was like, I gotta save that because this is a great opportunity to talk about the mistakes you make when you're drawing your portraits, at least when you're first starting out. And it's all about your value range, basically your black to your whites, right? And look at these gaps in this drawing. There's just a bunch of white space. Literally, it's just paper, right? There's no lead on there, there's no graphite on there. It's just all white, and a lot of the areas aren't very dark either, so there's not a big value range, right? There's like, it looks like there's only like 3 or 4 values. I see this beginner mistake with a bunch of people who do portraits, who quote unquote have done a lot of portraits, and they're still making this mistake. I'm talking about 10 years on, they're still making this mistake. I see tattoo artists make this mistake when they're doing portraits, and they just are leaving huge gaps and huge swaths of skin. You're never gonna get big gaps in white in any piece unless it's a huge tangent of light. It usually never happens. And look at these portraits. These newer portraits that I've done a couple years ago, they hardly have any white in them, meaning most of these drawings are touched by some value, even however light. You know, you look at this drawing and it just doesn't have any, you know, unless it's like a highlight, then you might leave it white. Hardly ever are you gonna have big gaps of white. I see it all the time with beginner artists, but I also see it with artists who quote unquote do portraits. Like it's just never gonna happen. To not do it correctly is not a style. So when it comes to black and white, that's the easiest to learn your portraits, and that's why you should always start with black and white, because you learn your value ranges and you learn how dark to go or how light to go, and your eye really needs to learn how to tell the difference between, you know, how dark something is and how light something is. You're always going to want to start with your absolute darks. It's just going to be the easiest way to figure out how far you can go from light to dark, right? There's always going to be an objective value range. This is what you're always going to want to pay attention to. It's going to be from white, and there's going to be several value ranges, you know, of gray, of that neutral gray, and it's going to go all the way to pure black, right? Absolute white to absolute black. You're always going to be using that as a reference, or at least know that each and every portrait you've ever done, usually, you know, some are going to be different than others, but most are going to have a large value range. There are going to be exceptions where there's not very much light and it's very subtle, but even in certain portraits, yeah, it can be subtle. Most of it can be maybe 1 or 2 value ranges, but there's hardly ever going to be, you know, big swaths of skin or areas of your paper that are going to be complete black or complete white. It just doesn't work like that. And why does it not work like that? Because there's different light reflections bouncing off of certain surfaces, whether it's the floor or it's a wall behind you. So there's always all these little things that you got to pay attention to, that are these little light sources that are always banking off the form of your face, right? Depending on what side it is and what side of your face is, or, you know, certain objects is catching that light. You always got to pay attention to that. Our faces and our bodies and our forms aren't, you know, stuck in a vacuum, you know what I mean, where it's complete dark. It's just would never happen, especially when it comes to your face. There's certain forms to your face where they're going to be affected by some type of light source, so you always have to remember that that is the case. Make sure that you are paying attention to these facts. Bottom line, experiment when you are starting with your portraits, and just avoid pure white and pure black in your drawings at all times until you get better at spotting those value ranges. If you're wrong, you can always adjust later on. The easiest way to get better at your portraits in color is getting your value range correct. Take care in keeping your eyes sharp and objectively correct as you can. I promise you your drawings will drastically improve with seeing your value range. Alright guys, that's all I have for you. I'll see you later.